Just making sure. We're cut. Mics aren't hot now.
Nah, they're still hot. They're still hot. But I'll let him dunk on the on the single truth thingy. But the mic is yours. Go for it.
Yeah. Well, I'll try to avoid my soapbox this time of day, but I guess we could start with single source of truth. Well, let's just get everybody's opinion. I don't want to dictate what our collective opinion here is, but you know my opinion on single source of truth, which is it's a myth. It really doesn't belong in the stable of concepts and commitments in digital marketing and e-commerce and customer growth. Like, I understand the desire for it, but like I also understand the desire for fairy tale love and other myths as well. So I think, single source of truth is something people have been aspiring toward. I think philosophically I'm aligned to, like, say, executive dashboards where as a company you have a shared idea of what was our revenue and transactions last month, how many users and traffic did we bring in, what was our performance like. So I am fundamentally in agreement with the idea of having shared sources of information across an organization so that you don't have like 20 different groups running the same data and getting different results. Get ready to deep dive into the world of digital transformation, where we explore the latest trends, innovations, and challenges shaking up industries. Join us as we decode the secrets behind successful digital strategies and hear from experts who are at the forefront of disrupting the status quo. In each episode, we'll unravel the mysteries of the digital realm and uncover the hidden opportunities that lie within. From artificial intelligence to blockchain, from automation to cybersecurity, we'll leave no digital stone unturned. But hold on tight, because this podcast isn't your average tech talk. We're injecting a hefty dose of wit and humor into every episode, making learning about digital transformation an absolute blast. So if you're ready to embrace the digital revolution with a smile on your face, tune in to the Digital Disruption Podcast and get ready to be entertained, informed, and inspired. Don't miss out on the fun. Subscribe now and join us on this wild digital journey.
All right. Good morning, guys. How's everything?
It's going well. Good evening. How are things in Cairo?
Oh, good. How's things in the US?
It's good. Billings is starting to take a turn towards winter finally, so mornings are very
I see you wearing a coat.
crispy. Yeah. It's
So
definitely.
what
We're
did you
just in
have
the
for
middle of a
breakfast?
bomb cyclone here, hence why I'm dressed like I'm going to be walking through tons of rain.
Oh, it rarely like rains here. Like rain is like a rare occasion in Egypt overall, especially in
Yeah.
Cairo. Sucks. Love rain.
We could find a way to ship all the rain we get here over to you. I think we'd have a really good business opportunity.
I mean, I'm down. I'm down, definitely. So what did you have for breakfast?
Do you really want to know what I had?
I do. Yes.
I had 3 eggs over hard, hash brown potatoes, bacon, and one big buttermilk pancake.
All right. Not too much
Dude,
processing.
this man's making himself a grand slam every morning.
Yeah,
Unreal.
it does, yeah.
Like,
That's not my usual breakfast. I went out to breakfast this morning. Yeah.
there it is. There it is. I was like, you put all of that into the kitchen. You've cleaned it. Your wife is going to come home to a spotless kitchen.
Yeah.
I had a good
I'm
workout
adhering
this morning.
to coffees for closers. So that's what I'm doing. and then I will have my breakfast after
Oh,
this.
Nice.
I had cheese. I had two types of cheese. One is cheddar and the other one is processed. I wonder if cheddar is less processed cheese than processed cheese.
I think
I
cheddar
I
is
wonder,
less
is cheddar the
processed.
same? Is cheddar the same where you are versus like American cheddar or like
Yeah,
a
that's a good question
traditional,
because you
like an
have
Irish
American
cheddar?
cheese, which is like the heaviest, like the most processed cheese in the world. I do not want to call it cheese, like
Yeah.
I don't
which
know American calls that cheese. At least
no,
the
it's
people that know what it is.
it's
Yeah.
plastic. Which segues me to what we want to talk about this episode, which is data and analysis and unprocessed data versus processed data, data from different tools, and the merge of multiple data sources into the what usually people call the single truth, which Patrick here calls BS zone. But I'll let him dunk on the on the single truth thingy. But the mic is yours. Go for it.
Yeah. Well, I'll try to avoid my soapbox this time of day, but I guess we could start with single source of truth. Well, let's just get everybody's opinion. I don't want to dictate what our collective opinion here is, but you know my opinion on single source of truth, which is it's a myth. It really doesn't belong in the stable of concepts and commitments in digital marketing and e-commerce and customer growth. Like, I understand the desire for it, but like I also understand the desire for fairy tale love and other myths as well. So, um, I think single source of truth is something people have been aspiring for toward. I think philosophically, I'm aligned to like say executive dashboards where, as a company, you have a shared idea of um, what was our revenue and transactions last month, how many users and traffic did we bring in, what was our performance like. So I am fundamentally in agreement with the idea of having shared sources of information across an organization so that you don't have like 20 different groups running the same data and getting different results. So in that sense, I'm conceptually aligned to like a single source of information. The problem with that though is as soon as you want to do anything actionable and you want to like assess campaign performance or you want to assess customer engagement channel performance or do other meaningful things to optimize and improve performance, you no longer can use that like shared source of information. So that's where I'm philosophically opposed. So my um, the imagery I use or the concept I use is like the right tool for the right job, which is fundamentally opposed to the idea of a single source of truth. I think only like religious fanatics and naive people really believe strongly in a single source of truth.
You know
CEOs.
what, Patrick? No, I'm not going to turn this into one of those discussions. No,
What's your opinion, Sean? Single source of truth. Give your elevator pitch for single source of truth or not.
no. I think, shocker, you and I are aligned on this because it's great in theory, right? Like it would be perfect if we could just look at one source and go and one dashboard or one like tool. I pull up one tool and everything's there, and it's like we have our revenue. And if we're going like beyond digital, right? Like that's in theory kind of what an ERP system is supposed to be for a business in its operation, right? It's got your accounting, it's got your P&Ls, it's got inventory, it's got everything kind of tied together, right? Those are complex
Mm-hmm.
systems, and those are actually easier to track because it's not cookie based, right? There's like
Yeah.
hard items that exist there. So theoretically, like in a lot of business cases, some systems can be a single source of truth, or at least unify data
Yeah.
in a pretty thoughtful and highly accurate manner.
Yeah.
In the case of digital and the way the world is moving, and this will be another topic, but like that court ruling this week with Google and basically being asked to divest Chrome, Android might be next. You are moving further and further away from that capability, and so bye cookieless world, which still could be but we know that that could that could still happen potentially, most likely will. All of these pieces are creating an ecosystem where, like Patrick, you're saying, get the right tool for the right job. Um, and then I would say if you're able to, and you have someone who is interested enough in your organization to stitch that data together in a thoughtful manner that you're not, I hate this term. I think I've had 3 of these already. Like we should play it. Side note, we should put a bingo card up on this and be like every little like consulting phrase or idiom that comes up. Don't boil the ocean. There it is, check.
Yes.
But it really is applicable in this case. Like, okay, what are like the 4 or 5 things that we need to know?
Mhm.
And be okay with some of that being approximate, not accurate.
Mhm.
Um, and you're probably going to be okay. So
Yeah.
fully aligned with you. Like it would be in a perfect world, yes, you could do it. It's just not the ecosystem that exists. And it's if you're a pretty multidimensional business, if you've got multiple channels in which you're selling from, interacting with customers from, it's just not going to exist.
Yeah.
Sorry.
All right. Daoud, what's your
Real
opinion
Debbie
on
Downer on that one. Doesn't exist. Can't have it.
Yeah.
I
I mean,
mean,
yeah. What's your opinion, Daoud? Single source of
um,
truth or
I mean, as much as you'd love for it to exist, I don't think that I've seen it exist before. Like when I when I worked at FickPy, which is like an A/B testing tool, we had always a difference between the data that we tracked through our platform and then the data that was coming through Google Analytics. And I'm like, so which one is truer?
yeah.
We have no idea. Like it's really
Yes.
hard to
The answer is just
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Well, there's the thing,
which
right? I
is
mean, yeah. So there's a few different parts of that, right? I mean, one, analytics, like let's say even the best case scenario, you have everything implemented perfectly. All the tracking for Google Analytics is happening in a first party context. Your consent is optimized to get as high a consent rate as possible. Everything's just perfect. Okay, so if you get like 90% of your data captured, you're doing really, really well at this point, right? So, okay, so you're missing 10% of your data, best case scenario. So that means if you wanted revenue and transaction data in a commerce setting, or you wanted lead and opportunity data in a B2B setting, right? You're going to need to look somewhere. If you want an actual reckoning of like what you generated, you're either going to have to look at your commerce engine data, right? Back end, or you're going to have to look in your CRM, right? Or whatever for your leads. So there, you can't really, I mean, obviously that data can be then like all sent into a data warehouse. You can try and unify these things, but you're still going to, your analytics data is still going to be not a facsimile copy of reality. It's going to be directional and incomplete. And 90% would be a good rate at this point, so it could be much lower than that. And you just take any of these systems, a mobile measurement platform, CDP, et cetera, they're all going to have more and less data fidelity. So the best you can do is make that data really, really clean, make sure your data collection is as good as it can be, as robust as it can be, but it's never going to represent reality. And then the other part of it is you're capturing data from campaigns, affiliate programs, influencers, referrals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And like no attribution that's applied to that is actually reality, right? It's all based on an assumption. Like you're either saying, well, the last thing that was touched made this happen.
They
The
clicked.
first,
Yeah.
right? The first thing that happened made this happen. All of them made it happen. But lo and behold, there's no impression data in here or view data for CTV impressions. So we have no visibility into impressions. But we know, like, obviously, like, Wall Street like doesn't invest in companies that don't advertise. Like we know companies can't go to market and grow a brand without doing top of funnel advertising, right? Like, or let's say the process is much slower. I mean, there are
Yeah.
certain, right? So at a certain point, you're saying the data we collect is not a representation of the reality that we work in, right?
Yeah.
I think a really good example of that is like affiliate and influencer marketing, right? Like that's a last click, supposedly getting some sort of attribution to a brand. But if you're a large multinational brand, how much weight goes to the influencers piece of that versus like, well, there's affinity for the brand. It's a known brand. I just happened to see, Joe 45 super guy using that thing I like. And so, oh, now that pushes it over the edge. And so then you start getting into like, how do you model that? Like, how do you want to weight that? Like, I'm a big proponent. I know we talk a lot about this with companies that we work with, and this is like a big challenge. Linear models and models that like where you're weighting certain pieces of that journey, certain channels. Ultimately, if you do not have complete data, but at least you can understand those user journeys, I think you have a better idea of how to spend your money, and how to where to put effort, right? Like, you just said it. You're not going to stop advertising. You're not going to stop. Like, don't. Like most of the time, you shouldn't. Like these experiments run pretty frequently. Microsoft did this a couple of years ago, where they turned off a lot of their brand advertising. So if people think back, maybe like prior to COVID, Microsoft was doing a lot of TV, a lot of billboard, like outdoor, and then they pulled it in. Shocker, the brand affinity is still pretty high because every time you log onto your computer, unless you're an Apple user, you're seeing the logo. That was their test, essentially. It's like we're in the digital landscape consistently, and we only have a handful of products we actually want to advertise. Is it better to do that or not?
Well,
not every company can get away with that, but
yeah, of course, right? Yeah, of course. But that brings up a really good point, which is most companies do not like what you are currently doing from a advertising, marketing, SEO, what you're doing, content, all of those things is part of your status quo performance, right? So most companies have never sufficiently taken the time and effort to introduce enough variability into that, like in a controlled way, to really have an understanding what the heartbeat of their business is, like what the baseline is. Like, I mean, this is obviously
brand
also
lift.
well, not only brand lift, but just like what I'm about to say is an equally sort of naive perspective, but I'm going to say it just as a counterpoint, right? Which is to say, if you stopped doing everything today for a month, right? What would business look like, over the next 30 days to 60 days, right? Like no company's going to do that.
New CEO, new board. That's what it would look like.
Right. No, of course. Yeah. So again, I'm not suggesting a company do that, but like as a thought experiment, right?
Absolutely.
At the end if at the end of 60 days, you would have an idea of what is the kind of heartbeat of your company, like how many transactions and how much revenue would you drive, just based on where your company is at today, right? Without further sort of advertising support. Like that's the only way you could, in a true sense, know that. The reason why it's naive is the efforts you're doing today are contributing to that heartbeat, that baseline, right? So so what you have to do, right? And this is why controlled testing is like way more informative than attribution modeling of any kind, right? Like you literally have to like have a treatment in mind, and you have to selectively hold out some proportion of people who you could be targeting with that, right? And then expose the exposure group to it, and then see what the actual performance difference is. And like the quintessential examples of that are where you see, like I was reading some really interesting research yesterday where it's like remarketing is a perfect example of this, right? You end up exposing a whole bunch of users to remarketing media spend who would have bought from you anyway.
Yep.
And so, right. So if you look at the actual attribution on that, it looks like huge return on ad spend or profit on ad spend, a massive amount of like performance. If you actually do controlled experimentation, it honestly almost a lot of the time looks like zero difference in performance or very little like if you look at from an incrementality lens, you're getting a very small amount of lift. So what that means is
But a lot of the flaws in that philosophy exists in like lack of control of the inventory, right? Like if we wanted to go down that, we can go down this, but like control of
ad inventory
inventory,
or product inventory.
no, ad inventory, right?
Okay.
Like a lot of ad networks are saying, hey, you have prime placement on X, Y, and Z,
Oh
but
yeah.
you and I have done these audits. We go through these, like,
Oh yeah.
if, yeah, part of the negligibility of that is because, like, are you actually targeting the right people with that, where it's like, oh, I don't, like, if I see an ad that's incongruent to something that I'm on that site for, so like, let's just say I'm looking at like something sports, and then I
Yeah.
see an ad for, cheddar cheese, like I'm probably not going to mentally, right? Just think about what a user experience. I'm not going to want to actually take action on that.
I
And I
don't
know that's a
disagree with
weird,
that.
so like a lot of that also exists in, like, we need to be better practitioners of owning the ad space we're targeting. But yeah, because I don't want
Agreed,
to say
but
like the
just
remarketing is ineffective.
I'm
It
not saying
can be
remarketing is
effective when
ineffective.
done right.
What I'm
The-
saying is that without a controlled experiment, without an actual holdout group that is not exposed to what you think you're doing with your intervention, which in this case would be an advertisement, you actually don't have any really reliable sense of the impact you drove. All you have is a binary. This person saw an ad or didn't see an ad. You have no idea whether it actually impacted their behavior or not. And that's the problem, right? So then, anyway,
well, if I had
same
that
reason why, yeah.
user permanently cookied, and and I could track them all the way across the web, just hear me
Yeah.
out. I have an idea.
Okay. All right.
We're going to track them everywhere they go. I'm going to
Yep.
know every site they go to. I'll know when
Yep.
my ad hits, and then I
Yeah.
could weigh that. That's a good idea, right? Like that, there's nothing wrong with doing that.
Well, there would, I mean, assuming somebody consented to it, I wouldn't necessarily philosophically have a problem with it. I do have a problem with, like, say, what's it, retention.com, where they are like surreptitiously surveilling people and exposing their email address so that they can, and of course, yes, they can opt out, so they're can spam compliant, but I do have a problem with that. But no, I
It's
mean,
going to have to like blank that out on the podcast. Like it'll be .com.
we can
Shots
speak
fired.
about companies. Yeah, no, I don't compete with them. I just think it's a very unethical practice. But
Sure, a lot would agree with many would agree with you
yeah.
on that. But I understand where you're going with this, and it's
So yeah, no, but the whole
brands can't
problem is,
afford
right,
to turn off these experiments, or can't afford to
yeah,
run these experiments. And so
or they
actually understanding
can.
like impact,
I think
yeah,
you
they
can.
can.
You can't do the naive version of what I said. Is you can't turn off everything today and see what happens. No, and nor would we ever recommend somebody do that. But controlled experiments are kind of a perfect low risk way to do this, to conceptually do the same thing. You have to hold people, like, if you're planning to expose an audience to some marketing tactic and you really want to sort of have some idea what the impact of it is, you really do have to have some comparable group of people who you could be exposing to that and you're not, right? That's the only way you kind of can actually, in a very experimental way, see the difference. And it's the same reason why so much like media mix modeling fails, is there's no variability in the budgets, right? Like, in order to really see a statistically meaningful difference, like in what, for example, a change in budget allocation for non-branded paid search or CTV does, right? You have to have on a weekly level of granularity, you have to have some variability in the amount of money you're spending that's meaningful. Like, I mean, like, say from 0 to 10K a week,
Yeah,
to
like a
10
more than
10K to
greater than
20K.
50%.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like
It can't be like 20%, because then you're not
right,
like there's seasonality, there's
right,
like behavioral
and
pieces. When's payday for people, right? There's all
yeah,
these other factors where I need to, this makes total sense, right? A significant
yeah,
amount to say, no,
and it
we've
has to
gone like,
be, yeah,
yeah. And then can you fluctuate that, or toggle that budget consistently over a period of time to know, okay, now we've taken away the variability of seasonality, some user behaviors, some of those, to know, okay, every other week we run 50% higher. Guess what? It doesn't change. Our transactions out of that channel, there's no change. That tells you then, okay, well then we can run at the lower end of that budget. And
Well,
start
the other
looking
thing
at other
within,
uses for that.
right. Well, the other thing within like a media mix modeling standpoint is like you don't even have to look at like you can ignore attribution. I mean, you can still use attribution as a sanity check, but like you can correlate the variability of your budget and impressions and views, right? You can correlate that to your overall transactions and revenue, right? Because you're varying the budgets enough, you're going to actually see that impact in aggregate. And so, but a lot of organizations, they don't have either the leeway from their leadership or they just haven't kind of gone through the thought process of structuring it. So like if I have a $50,000 or $100,000 test for a channel or a new ad format, I'd be far better off going 10K this week, 30K the next week, 20K the following week, 15K, and then, so doing something that has variability built in to see, just to be able to kind of see that, right? But anyway, that's just something to think about. I don't know how we got down this rabbit
hole. So what metrics then should we be looking at to kind of help, like, I guess, get a barometer of truth? Like what would you lean into then if I'm a digital marketing director trying to like get a grasp on this? What are like web traffic? I think, let's start out to in, like what, take me through the ABC kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I do think I don't think the metrics are going to surprise anybody, but like, if you have a website or a mobile app, like you need users coming to those assets in order to be able to do something, transact, convert, whatever that conversion looks like. You need them to have the equivalent of a visit or a session where they engage with your content, your products, etc. So none of that would
is it user or session that's more important? What philosophically for you? What's got better value, the user or like the sessions?
Yeah, I think we were talking about this earlier. I've been thinking about this a lot for the last week because I've been working on some analysis for clients, and it's I've been running through these different examples in my own brain, and just what other people in the industry are doing. But there has been a move. I will say 95% of companies probably still report on conversion rate as a ratio to sessions. But there's a lot of companies that have kind of shifted that perspective more towards users because your customers are actually users, right? Your customers are not sessions. So, and I'm also going to get into sessionization and why it's confusing in other ways as well. But let's just say, philosophically, I think a user is a closer proxy to a customer than a session is. And for most business models, the user is a much more realistic divisor of your conversions. So in terms of assessing your performance based on the user in a particular time period makes a lot more sense. I'm going to give you a couple examples that are counter to that. But I will also say that in the context of analytics and media platforms, a user is also confusing because it doesn't equate to an individual because of the fact that like client ID. So especially for anonymous users, the client ID is particular to a specific device and a specific browser. So an actual one individual can have multiple, be counted
3 or
as
4 profiles.
Users. Yeah. So that's where something like a CDP comes in. So there are, again, even though I don't believe necessarily in a single source of truth, like platforms that can unify profiles, that's useful. For that reason, I still think user is a user is a closer approximation than a session for performance, and obviously a unified set of profiles that looks more like a customer is better yet. So,
Patrick, you're sounding like a modern day Don Draper.
Oh wow, I'm not sure if that's. I mean, I understand. I'm going to take it as a compliment because it
is a compliment because it's in that context. You and I talk about this a lot. And it's like we got so inundated with all of these these channels and the metrics that come out of them.
Yeah.
And like, look at all the ways that we can splice data and attribute things and like, oh, this session was 2 minutes. They came back, they bounced, came back, did it, and within that 30-minute window. But ultimately, it's like, well, one user made a purchase. Really, like if you simplify it, right? And I think a lot of businesses could benefit from simplifying this, like cut out the noise. One user bought 3 things. They've come back to the site 4 times in that 45-day window. That's it.
Yes.
Right. So it took them 45 days to purchase 2 items.
Right.
If we understand that and what they bought, now we have that's the most valuable data. Yeah. Where are they spending time in that journey? But like, that tells you a lot if you just simplify.
Yeah. So I'll give you, it's a perfect segue into these examples, right? So if I'm thinking about, let's just say a streaming platform, right? That where you buy, episodes or you rent movies for a 48-hour period, right? And it costs you between 99 cents and $3. You can probably think of a real life example that matches this model. That in that case, I'm a relatively young person, or I have relatively young children, so I'm potentially renting things that they want to watch. I have some disposable income, or my expenses, aren't that high, whatever, different stages of life. But I could see, right, a session in that scenario, a session is probably a realistic scale interaction where I could buy something almost like, theoretically speaking, every session I could maybe purchase or rent something, right? Okay. So in that case, like session is a reasonable metric. And how do I know that? Because I have like domain expertise in my business, and I have actual business data that people legitimately repeat purchase with a high level of frequency, and therefore sessions make a lot of sense. But I also want to
more times than not, that whole journey, that user's logged in.
Yeah.
So let's there's that piece too, right? Like I should, in that business, right, understand my user fairly well, or like those customer profiles pretty well.
Absolutely. Now looking at another, like now let's say I'm a direct consumer luxury outdoor product brand. I have a price point that's like average price $750 or more. It takes a user on average 6 visits to my website before they make a purchase, right? So now if I just think of if I think of 10 users who all subscribe just to that average, I'm going to have 60 sessions to get 6 conversions. So I'm going to divide 6 by 60 to get my conversion rate. But I'm, in fact, and then plus all the non-converting, sorry. So I'm not even considering the non-converting people at this point, right? But really, realistically, like there's a multiple of 6 sessions times every like realistic potential customer, right? So is a session really a good barometer of my performance of anything at that point? And it's not. And so like active users is a much more meaningful divisor of my total transactions, right, for this week. If I divide that by actual users, that's a much closer approximation of performance, right? And most businesses,
Well, I was going to say, and in that model, probably safe to assume my new versus returning user delineation, that the affinity for purchase or conversion in a returning user 2 to 3x most likely, right?
Probably.
Because again, outdoor, think about the industry you're in, heavily researched. If I'm going to buy something that's high end, like a field coat, I want to spend $400 on a field coat, $500 on a field coat, let's just say. That's a pretty big purchase for some people. If I'm going through those steps, right, like that affinity is pretty high. Like instantaneous purchase on that, probably pretty low.
Right. Now magnify
aggregated sessions.
Right. Now magnify that by 6x. I'm going to buy a $3,000 rifle scope, right? Like, which is not that uncommon, right? Or a $5,000 spotting scope, right? Like, I mean, the amount of sessions and research, right? And probably the amount of potential marketing touch points, some of which never even make it to your website, right? Again, it's just the session mentality is not the appropriate lens to be thinking from here. And neither is getting like super wound up about a 0.9% conversion rate as a ratio of sessions. It's just not it's not any longer a meaningful metric for your business.
But it gets us more money for advertising from the top down.
True. That is true.
You are past the
And
30
then-
minutes, FYI.
Oh,
FYI.
well, we're bad boys today. Sorry. Sorry. We're not. So now this brings me to my other question, sessions in the first place. So, right, you got sort of in the Google world, you have this concept of sessions. In the Adobe world, we'll just pick the two big platforms at the moment. In Adobe, you have the concept of a visit. Like the logic of them is close. It's not identical in terms of, right, but ultimately you're basically saying, so like sessionization is the sort of minimal like level of processing that happens in an analytics platform in some ways, right? Which is to say, for a given user identifier, there's a collection of hits that have been sent to a server within a given time period, not interrupted by a certain level of inactivity, right? In Google Analytics, 30 minutes, right? And so therefore, like, we're going to wrap all of this hit collection in this concept of a session for this user, right? So like even the idea of a session doesn't exist like as a data collection protocol. It
was
exists
just
as
it was like the clean way to show it. There was
and it's important.
Like,
and I don't
well, no, go ahead.
So-
I mean, we're
no.
here because of something was kind of prescribed. Like, I'd love to know early on, when these platforms, like when Google Analytics was being formulated, like that engineering team going, well, I mean, that's really, like, that's just 4 or 5 hits, homepage, second page, I bounce, I come back, I actually bookmarked it, but I did it pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Like the criteria that had to exist, like I want to know, I would have killed to be a fly on the wall there as they were talking about how do we want to push this out?
Yeah. And I mean, conceptually, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not poo-pooing the idea of a session like as a concept. I just want us all to be understanding, right? It's not like it doesn't represent a reality. It's a computed aggregation of hits to a server that are like packaged to be some unified interaction with a website or a mobile app. And then it became this divisor for like performance metrics, ratios of conversions. Now, and I mean, it's fine, but it's like, okay, we're trying to get more digitally mature. So we're asking these questions of, well, what are the actual meaningful metrics you want to measure? And then because people are stitching data from different systems, so let's look at the world of, say, mobile measurement, for example. Mobile measurement doesn't innately have the idea of a session so much as opens. So like, say, for example, I was looking at data in Braze the other day. Well, Braze captures a lot of really killer data about mobile apps. Attribution data, utilization data, opens, etc., conversions. But an open, every time you literally open an app that is not active, that's closed, that will be an open. But if you put an app to the background and then you re-foreground that app, that is also going to be accounted as an open. So that means now Braze has essentially two metrics. One is opens, but then you can also report on unique opens, right? Unique opens
Per
ends up
user?
Yeah, basically, yes. Which, yes. Which in the app context is much closer than a user in web. But anyway, it's so now if you take a direct export of raw data from Braze, let's say that's opens, it's going to be many times higher than the sessionized data from your analytics platform. And so now you're going to be dividing your conversions by mobile app opens. That's now even, maybe double what your sessions are. So now your conversion rate is going to be 0.6%, and your boss is going to be like wringing your neck saying, why does our mobile app conversion suck? And you're going to say, wait a second, we had a lot of new customer acquisition and our revenue is up 15% month over month.
Well, I know our mobile that creates a red herring, right? That's a great example of like maybe you're an e-commerce platform or a retailer that has an app experience and a web experience. Web's going to look better primarily, most more times than not. But if that user is a logged in user and they leave things in their cart, which we know they do. I'm just I might be jumping ahead here on some things, but if they leave things in the cart, that's a great example of like, well, actually the value per user, right? Well, they left 5 things in the cart. They went back and forth because they're shopping. Then they had to get in the car. Then they had to take the kids to school, and they had to go to work. And then they have a coffee break and they go, oh yeah, I remember, especially this time of year during the holidays. Oh, I still got to buy those 5 items in my cart. You know what? I'm going to pull that one out. Found out grandma doesn't like that sweater. I got to think of something else. And so you're going to see, like 15 pings from that device. And it might, and there might even be a time where they're going through offsite. Let's just say they find an affiliate or something like that. And they're like, oh, then they hit the web and then kick it into the app again. Okay, there's that other session, but guess what? Everything's going back into that user's cart. And so ultimately those 5, 6, 7 items, it dilutes it so much that we get a false positive when really we want to know Peggy Sue hit us 15 different times on her journey to purchase those 5 items. And they weren't for her because it doesn't fit her profile.
Yeah.
Right.
No, right. Again, I'm not trying to shit on data that is potentially meaningful. No, it
is helpful if someone's doing it that often, but
yeah. Like opens are really interesting, right? Like for example, like if you were to think about like a diet app or a fitness app.
A fitness app is actually going to be another example I wanted to talk about because that's another one, right?
I might go into that app 30 times in a day, and I might say, okay, I did this many planks, I did this many sets of squats, and I literally might be opening and closing that app every time because I get distracted or I go back to my workout or whatever. So that would tell your app developers or your product owners, right? Okay, here are very active users of this application, but what it doesn't tell them is, like maybe I can also like order my like creatine or protein powder, and if they literally said, this person made 1 order out of 200 opens, so our conversion rate really sucks. That would be a misleading metric.
Versus, that person's logged in 200 times to track versus the average user, which we now across that aggregated data sets, it's 20 times. So they're 10x the normal. This is someone we should actually maybe reach out to for an influencer opportunity. If they're assuming they're logged in because they're tracking their health data. Influencer opportunity, promotional items like discount, like that's someone that's what the data should tell you, not what are they doing here? They're bouncing too much, or they're like, that's a behavior. Like I was thinking of Whoop specifically. Like Whoop has found very interesting ways to make their experience sticky, right? Because they're a wearable with no interface other than what happens on the phone. And so you have to log into the app on your phone to log your data. They have you like a very basic use case there. They have you journal your data. You journal every morning, and then they've built a pretty interesting like intake or criteria to, did I take creatine today? Yes or no? How much? Like they know these triggers and they add them pretty frequently. Like your level of understanding of your user at that point, if you're a fitness app versus maybe like a retailer, like non-grocer, I would say.
Right. But opens in that case becomes a measure of your engagement and how active of a user you are. It doesn't become the divisor of how how conversion performance is happening, right? Like daily active user count, like dividing conversions by daily active user counts is much more accurate in terms of engagement performance. Yeah.
And in most of those scenarios, like using a fitness app again, it's subscription. right?
Yeah.
So maybe
No,
freemium
true. Yeah.
user. So
True.
like, okay, who's giving us data? Who's using a
Right.
freemium version or a free? And then who's paying for like probably a mid tier and then like a high tier?
Yep.
And who's actually utilizing those features in that? Like, could you upsell into the highest tier for someone who's using the mid and into the mid for the freemium?
Yeah.
And that's we see
Or
this
if
a lot,
heck,
right? Like,
yeah. Or with the proliferation of retail media networks, right? Like if you're a fitness app and you have all this killer information about people, like being able to let like health product companies monetize off of like really active health users, that that could be a great monetization strategy for a health a subscription based health brand, for example, right?
so then how do I, as a digital marketing lead or a director, whatever, um, is this industry specific? Like, it feels
It
like our
is.
use cases that we've laid out here very much lead us towards that belief. But
Yeah.
like when going then into like the ABCs of looking at these things, so like the acquisition to behavior to like a consequence or conversion based action.
Yeah.
I typically have referred to it this way in the past of like acquisition, behavior, conversion, but really um, it should be some sort of like appearance, behavior, consequence. If we want to go into more of this context, like a reframing
Well,
of some of that,
I think the
because it's
basic
not
framework.
always a conversion.
No, not always, but yeah, I mean, but if we think about it, like ultimately, like you're trying to, most companies and are trying to make money in one way or another. So like ultimately, you're trying to convert somebody who's not paying you to somebody who is paying you. So, but no, I agree. It's very context specific. You need to have domain level expertise about your business, about your market, and you need to focus on metrics that are meaningful. And you need to sit around the table and you need to like question and scrutinize um, status quo accepted understandings of what we should and shouldn't be met. I mean, just like the same reason like we tell our kids like if Joey like jumped off the London Bridge, would you jump off the London Bridge? It's like we should be we should be telling ourselves as marketers like because company ABC down the road is measuring conversion rate as a expression of sessions, should we, right? Like I mean, we
Or should we
want
be looking at retention rate? Like
you know,
what's depending on that bit, like that's a great like going into kind of
yeah,
the KPIs of all this, right? Like what is a KPI that our business should focus on?
yeah.
And like, yeah, just because it's an industry standard, well, maybe your model offers something different that like that's not going to tell the best story.
Well, industry standards change. I mean, and
Yeah.
like we at if you want to be sort of at the front edge of digital maturity, like if a way of measuring performance, like the ultimately, right? Let's take it back to the example you used earlier. When you get down to reality, you're literally talking about one person, Sean Bucher. He he read about your product in a magazine. He saw an influencer talk about it online. He did a search for it because he got interested. Then maybe he saw like on social media. And then his wife mentioned, "Oh wow, I saw this cool product." And he said, "Oh my God, I saw it too." And she said, "Oh, I really think we need that." And Sean said, "Oh my God, I do too because I really value my wife's opinion about products and I want to make her happy." And then you go to the website and you say, "God, that's really expensive. I'm not ready to pull the trigger yet. I'm going to think about this for a couple of days." And then you go, "Geez, oh, wife, I know you said you really thought this was a cool product. Did you realize it's $799?" And she said, "No, my God, I didn't realize that." And then she said, "But you know what happened? I got a coupon for 25% off my first order. Like, fuck it, let's buy it because you know what? We just got a bonus. Let's go buy it." So you're okay
And
now,
45 days later,
and
I am
45 days
now a
later, you want
customer.
right. So the question is, what metrics will most like nothing's going to represent that in its truth, right? So like what metrics will allow you to assess performance most meaningfully? But in truth, you had a chance to convert one guy one time in all likelihood in a 60-day period of time.
I mean, if I'm looking at it, like if I'm on the other end of it and I'm internally looking at this user, this Sean you speak of, uh, Where did he find us? That's going to tell a really interesting story, right? Like, okay, where did he hear about us? How did this come about? Like, that tells me some sort of an impression metric might have some value worth considering when we start to model something or like put some weight on things. Okay, sounds like he saw an influencer using it. Okay, do we know the influencer? Like, do we manage our influencers in a pretty concise manner? Is it pretty loose? Be interesting to know. That tells me a little bit about maybe what the content he's consuming, his affinities, something to think about, right? Ooh,
Mhm.
consults with his wife, talks about like price point. Price point's a heavy consideration in here. Do we do a good job of comparing if we have like products in the market ourselves to somebody else in that purchase? Um, or is that content readily available? Do we know where that exists? Is that on CNET or like an aggregator site? Okay, helpful to know. And I know like there's some partner relationships there that content was probably paid for at some point, maybe. So that's good to know, right? Then you start to piece these together, and you're like, okay, well, how much should we spend on these pieces to get him there to get our $800 conversion? If it overall is a fraction of that, because then that user is one of 500 users that converted for that 700, and you're still 2x 3x because it's his first purchase, it's a new user acquisition. That's a pretty good proposition to me. I know some brands that would take a 1-to-1, but
No,
that's like
yeah,
that's how I would start to chunk that of like, okay, well,
yeah,
was this worth it?
yeah.
Will he come
No, I
back?
agree.
how,
But what
how do we
if,
keep him
yeah,
coming back now?
yeah. So now I'm going to throw it back to you. I think, I mean, you outlined some ways of thinking about like things you might want to measure. But if you're the one responsible for reporting on performance, what metric would you want to use to assess how well you did at your opportunity? Let's say you had 100 people that looked a hell of a lot just like how we described Sean. What metric would you
Yeah,
want to use to assess how well did you do at converting those 100 guys you had a chance to convert? Would you want to use sessions? Would you want to use opens? What would you want to use?
I'd want to know, for me, I'd want to know touch points in that journey, like just number of channels that we can track. If we can unify this somehow, let's just say we're really good at this. I'd want to know number of channels,
Mm-hmm.
because that tells a really interesting story, and you can kind of measure that, like, oh, our average new user, it takes 5, 7, 8 different channels
Mm-hmm.
to convert them or to get them in or to at least
Mm-hmm.
register. That's pretty telling. That could be something of value. I'd want to know their average purchase price,
Mm-hmm.
number of items in their that they
Mm-hmm.
purchase at any given time, and then I'd want to know lifetime value. Like, once I've converted you, I want to keep you.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, like, it's an old school mentality. Like, great, like, go rank for keywords. That's going to help in that acquisition. Go get visibility, pay for those impressions. But like, I want to know how many channels they had to visit, how many times maybe in those channels they came back to us. But
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, you know what's going to be like, what are they willing to buy, and maybe, probably, like, are they coming back after? That actually would be really valuable. If it's a new user acquisition, do they come back and interact with us within 6 months? Is there something that's
Yeah.
pulling them back? And
Yeah.
if not, that would be a red flag to me. Like, a one-time
Yeah.
purchase is a red flag.
So yeah. So I
Unless
don't.
it's
I don't. I mean, there
a
are some
car
things.
or something, like,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, no, right. This is again where the business domain expertise matters. But yeah, I agree. For brands that have a likelihood of a repeat purchase, yes.
yeah.
So let me ask you a question in a more simple way, because I mean I think well everything you said is totally relevant and I'm aligned with. But let's just say at the end of month one, you've just gone to market, or month two, so you've had enough time to convert some people. Are you going to assess your success by how you did versus Sean's 1 through 100, or are you going to assess how you did against sessions 1 through 2000 in terms of like what do you think is an actual barometer of your success? Like
I mean,
the
business
the
context here.
individual.
If I'm a startup, right? If I'm a mature brand, I should have some pretty good historical data to then validate that user journey against. And like, are we jumping the gun on something that may not actually, like, this goes back to the remarketing, but this can happen with trend a lot. I think that's a really good example, right? Like a brand makes an announcement, something comes up in the news, celebrity driven brand, right? Celebrities in the news for X. All of a sudden, oh, we saw a lift in sales. And they're like, well, yeah, of course you did. They were, caught off the coast of France, frolicking about before whatever. Con. I don't, I have outed myself as a low class. I did not go to Yale.
Neither did I.
Like
public
okay,
school.
Well, then
public school.
there's correlation there, right? It doesn't mean there's causation, but like there's probably some. Can you go back historically and see all of those things in the news and like, oh, we have a brand lift right after that. It's a 10-day lift every time that person shows up. Okay, well, that has a bigger impact than on just like the consistent user who's a different user, right? That audience that's like, nope, they buy our product consistently every time. I don't need to see George Foreman every 6 months. I just want to get my George Foreman grill every year, and I'm buying one for the family each year. Or like, I know that's probably not a great example, but I think what are the indicators that maybe send false alarms versus, okay, I have a consistent user versus, because a new user versus a returning user, those behaviors are going to differ, right?
Yeah. All right, let's tease this apart. This apart and wrap it up, because I think you're hitting on two distinct
I could take
things.
us down another half hour of conversation.
No. This is a good. No, I think because we want to make sure we touch. So you're talking about two different things, and they're both equally important. There's the upfronts. How do you get people to be aware, right? So like, and again, this varies by industry, it varies by product, price point, etc. But it's especially go to market, new brand. There is some period of time you have to hit people. You have to have enough touch points at the sort of top of the funnel awareness type, where you achieve what I guess we call effective reach, right? Which is enough frequency of ad messaging with a big enough percentage of your target market where you start to see an impact, right? There's enough awareness, favorability that somebody wants to actually now put you in their consideration set. If it's a totally new product that's never been seen before, that can take a little bit of doing, right? If it's like you're like the next version of Kleenex with the best lotion impregnated, tissue that there's ever been, well, at least people already know what Kleenex is. But you have a different problem at that point, is you have a very crowded field of commodities that you somehow need to convince people that you're different from. But anyway, they're both two different kind of problems. But ultimately, you need to have some form of effective reach with your target audience, so that you say, okay, we've hit 5% of our target audience with 17 different ad messaging across a diverse assortment of media formats, and hopefully like relevant in terms of like to their context of where they like to hang out online, etc. So we've given this 5% of people, we've given them a chance to either raise their hand or not raise their hand. So let's say of those 5% people you hit, you drove 1,000 people to your website. Now those people are now let's say if you've hit them at a frequency of 17 times, right?
So my total addressable market in this case is 200,000.
If it would be, good math. Yeah, you're good
1,000
at
math.
At
5, yeah, 200,000.
Yeah, you did some good math. So anyway, so now we've got 1,000 hand raisers.
Okay.
They've all had 17 media touch points, impressions and clicks, whatever. But they've arrived at your website. That's how we're saying they're hand raisers.
It's 20,000. It's not 200,000. It's 20,000. I'm asking this specifically because this dictates how you look at like affinities. That this is, if we're doing math on this. Sorry, this is where my brain goes. But it's like
you do the percentages. I'm talking about you have 1,000 hand raisers, whatever the percentage that is of 5% of.
Okay.
Yeah. Those 1,000 hand raisers now those are the 1,000 Seans.
That's consideration.
Yeah. Those are the 1,000 you actually have a chance to convert. They've come to your website.
Yes.
Now, they've also collectively had 17,000 media exposures of one kind or another. And so now the question is, over the next 45 days, if we use our example earlier of, let's say you have a 45-day window where the average on this conversion is going to happen. We don't know how many sessions each of those people is going to have, but they might, we've already said it's on average it's 6, right? But let's say it's even more than that. Let's say it's 10. So now we're going to have 10,000 sessions in the next 45 days. Like, I just want to know, just from a philosophical perspective, if you have to tell your boss at the end of that 45 to 60 day period, how'd you do? Do you think it makes more sense to say we had 20 purchases at a price of $800, and it works out to 20 divided by 1,000 Seans who we could have converted? Or do you think it makes sense to say we converted 20 Seans out of 10,000 sessions? What do you think is an actual more accurate measure of performance?
Well, it's the 20,000 out of the 1,000, because those are the people. Ultimately, who's the person in that interaction, the session rate, like that will create a false positive. Like it could.
Well,
so yeah,
it would say you did 10 times worse. Your ratio would be 10 times worse than what it should be. And somebody would say, why is our conversion rate 0.0001 or whatever it works out to, right?
Yeah, versus 20 of 10,000. So 0.005, something like that. Yeah, I mean, that's not great, right? But then you look at, but we've always had this conversation. It's just we've had to deal with, because we created the common language of session. We've always fought this, and we're like, but your price point's so high, and this is, at least I think, smart marketing. We spent to get the 20 at 800. So the $16,000, we spent 5,000. We spent 8,000, right? Cool. So we're 2 to 1 on new, and those were all new user acquisition.
Or you asked me a cost of customer acquisition. Should that be a meaningful metric here? Yes, it should.
I think that is. Yeah, it absolutely is. So then you start to go, okay, well, what tells that story? Yes. And you're like, well, okay, so we got a 2 to 1 to get them. That's pretty good.
Of course.
For a new user.
Yeah, I agree. But you would never get at a customer acquisition cost by focusing on sessions either, right?
No.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, unless you're someone who's like, it's a numbers game and we know we need the numbers to fill the funnel, which you kind of do, but it's a user still. The user's purchasing, not the session. Like, again, one is directional.
Right. Well, one is also a measure of activity, right? One is a measure of activity on your website or in your mobile app or whatever, right? And it's meaningful. It's not the best indicator of how you did at converting people to customers, right? That's the problem in my mind. And so the fact that you're focused on customer acquisition costs, for example, tells me you're focused on the customer. You're not focused on a set of aggregated interactions with a website or mobile app. You're focused on the customer, as you should be, right? Like, Daoud, do we add any value to the universe over this last 45 minutes, or what do you think? I know we're over on. We said we were going to keep it to a half hour. We didn't. I thought we got into some very meaty topics.
The session went longer than we anticipated, but the users were the same, Patrick.
Indeed. We had 3 users for
beyond the hour now.
Oh,
so
man. Oh, we're in trouble. Do we need to?
I don't know which
do we need to send you a box of pastries or something?
See, there's your conversion, and for that hour,
that's right.
For the extra 30 minutes of the 3 users, a donut or 2 makes things a lot better.
Yeah. So tell us, Doug, I mean, where did we go? What questions do you have about? Is this a convincing? Did I convince you that we shouldn't be dividing conversions by sessions at least?
I mean, yeah, but there's always, but what if? But there is always what if.
Like, but what
meet
if
in the middle,
CEO
call it succession or session success rate. Here's a new metric that we're going to standardize in the industry. And then we'll say, okay, well, successful sessions actually is a 10%, then we have a barometer. Let's establish this from here on out.
Well, it's
this is
interesting
what
if
we
you.
decided.
If it's interesting, just to tie this up. So in GA4, there's actually two metrics. There's a session key event rate, and there is a user key event rate, and it's interesting, right? And it's like most people are still focused on the session key event rate, and I'm not sure why. I do think, like everything, like momentum and complacency have a lot more staying power than we give credit for. And if like your CEO or your CFO or your CMO is used to seeing data in a certain format, there's oftentimes a reluctance to like see it in a different format. It's the same reason why multi-touch attribution, as imperfect as it is, it's had a hard time competing with last click, right? Because like people have to recalibrate their understanding of how different channels and campaigns contribute to revenue. I mean, I think I don't think at this point in digital evolution, I don't think complacency should dictate what our best practices are in terms of using the right metrics and KPIs to assess performance. I just don't think that should be the case. I think we should, and I think it behooves people to like just give yourself the freedom to say. And that's a wrap for this episode of the Digital Disruption Podcast. We hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the world of digital transformation and gained valuable insights to help navigate the ever-changing landscape.
Give yourself the freedom to use different metrics.
If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach us on our website, e-CENS.com, or connect with us on social media. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and stay tuned for more exciting discussions on the forefront of digital innovation. Remember, the future is now, and it's time to embrace the power of transformation. Thanks for listening, and until next time.